Good evening. We read the other day that the governor of Ohio, many years ago, was the means through which the legislature of the state passed a law imposing the death penalty for certain crimes, and that last month he went before the legislature to have this law repealed. And he was asked, why this change of heart? And his answer was that I have matured. As you read further, you see that what he meant was that he had come out from under Judaism, ancient Judaism, and had become a Christian. He had matured from ancient Judaic beliefs of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and had seen the vision of the Christ. Not only love thy neighbor, but pray for thine enemies, and forgive. In these ancient teachings, we witnessed the birth of all of mankind's troubles. The evils that were apparent on earth were all set into one word: devil or Satan. It made no difference whether a person broke the first or second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh, eighth, ninth or 10th commandments. All of these evils were ascribed to the devil or Satan. Satan, the devil, was the cause of all of this, the source. And then the entire Old Testament is devoted to a warfare against the devil, Satan, forces of evil, powers of evil, utilizing the power of good to destroy the enemy. It is a continuous warfare. It is only when we come into the New Testament that we learn that we are to put up the sword, that we are to forgive 70 times 7, pray for the enemy, not sue the man who cheats us. It is in this Christian dispensation when we learn the greatest secret ever revealed to mankind in the entire history of the world. And that is that it is true that you can sum up all of the evils of the world and acknowledge their source to be devil or Satan, but that you have no right to war with Satan or fight the devil or resist evil, for there is no power in these. The Hebrew world to which this message was addressed was not ready to accept this message because it couldn't understand it. It was too contrary to everything that Hebrews had been taught for several thousand years. It was too radical to be accepted. The Master, in his 3 years of ministry, realized what was taking place, because we not only have that sad passage, but many others that indicate the same thing. O Jerusalem, I would take you under my wing. I would teach you these things. I would comfort you and save you, but ye would not. Not quite, ye would not really, ye could not. You could not accept the fact that evil of any name or any nature is not a power, and that is the reason that it isn't to be fought. It is only a power in the mind and in the experience of those who accept it as such and then begin to battle it, to war with it. Some of the Hebrew leaders, even before Jesus, had great wisdom and spiritual illumination and saw this point, although nowhere in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, is it really taught as a specific principle as the Master taught it. But you do remember that there was one to whom the Hebrews came and said that the enemy is coming against us and they outnumber us many times. Their power is greater than ours, their weapons. And their Master told them that the enemy had only temporal weapons, the arm of flesh, and that it was not to be feared. These are strange words. The enemy is stronger than we are, has much more powerful weapons, but these weapons are called the arm of flesh, not to be feared. Temporal power. And then we're told they rested in his word. Another tremendous experience. They rested in his word. Evidently they rested from fear. They rested from anxiety, concern. And then the miracle happened. The enemy began to fight among themselves and destroyed each other. And all the Hebrews had to do was go out and gather up the spoils for themselves. This is virtually what the Master taught when he said, put up thy sword, when he said, resist not evil, when he said, return good for evil, when he said to Pilate, thou couldst have no power over me, unless it came from the Father. He was revealing to them the principle of the first commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods but me. Thou shalt not acknowledge any other power, whether you call it devil or Satan or mortal mind or carnal mind, whether you call it temporal weapons, whether you call it enmity, jealousy, hate, malice. Thou shalt not acknowledge anything as having power, or anybody, or any groups of anybody's, or any amount of temporal weapons. Thou shalt acknowledge no other power, no other God, no other presence but me, the One. As long as we are looking out from human eyes, this will be as difficult for us to believe, to accept, and to prove as it was for most of those Hebrews of old. As long as we are as materialistic as they were, and put our faith in material form, material weapons, material mindedness, we will be in the self-same position as they were. And we will lose the demonstration, even as he saw his people losing it, by their inability to accept that there are only two commandments that we need concern ourselves with, and that the first one is, there is but one power, one presence, and you must have no other, acknowledge no other, fear no other, and rest in this word, and then love thy neighbor as thyself. We, of course, know that we live in one of the most materialistic ages of all time, at least as materialistic as any other age. We know that the human world accepts all forms of mental and material power as if it were even greater than God power. We know that we fear material force and mental powers much more than we trust the one power. The reason is that we think of material and mental powers as powers opposite or opposed to God. There is where we lose our entire vision. We think of material power and mental power as if these were power. They are only power in the absence of God. If you were to see this universe separate and apart from God, then you would have to acknowledge that material power and mental power are real powers, and that the more material power or force you had, the better off you would be, or the greater your mental powers. the better off you would be. And this would all be true if you were operating solely in the realm of a human universe separate and apart from God. Now, the moment that you bring yourself into even a tiny measure of God realization, you come to a realm of life in which neither mental power nor material power is power. In other words, the mind becomes an avenue of awareness, not a force. And so do all of these things that we speak of as a material universe. They become instruments for good. It is only when you begin to think in terms of good and evil that you can use a flower for the purpose of beauty, decoration, perfume, and think also in terms of doing something with it and producing a poison. It is only when you think in terms of two powers that you can begin to think in terms of injury, destruction, theft, and all of these other things that come under the remaining commandments. In the ancient native races, original races, we find that each one knew the power of the mind for good and the power of the mind for evil. Just as we had here in Hawaii the activity of the good kahuna that blessed and healed, and the bad kahuna that cursed and killed, so we had these same experiences in Central America, South America, Africa, Australia. Wherever the power of the mind was known, the power of the mind was used for both good and for evil. In the earliest days of mental science in the United States, we found that originally the power of mind was used for good. It was used for healing. And then we find that some of the very earliest students made the discovery that the mind could be used for evil purposes. In these last few years, where the subject of propaganda and advertising have become such major influences in American life, it was discovered that you could use the power of mind to sell, the power of mind to put over a project, but that you could also use the power of mind to influence erroneously, even in the mercantile world. And so we had the spectacle last week of a legislature trying to pass a bill forbidding the use of subliminal perception advertising in the radio and television world, and one organization blocking it because it would interfere with their activity to have this outlawed. In other words, the determination to use the human mind to control masses of individuals for personal profit, personal gain. Not in the sense of offering you an article and leaving you with free choice as to whether or not you believe the advertising or whether or not you wish to purchase or need the article. Oh, no, no. No, the human mind must be used to compel you to buy it whether or not you want it, need it, or can afford it. Now, here you have what would ordinarily appear as the end of the world. Because if it is possible for an individual or a group of individuals to control the mind of the masses and make it do its bidding, then you no longer need a Russian dictatorship with armies. You only need a little group of men sitting in a studio with a television set before them or a radio set, broadcasting set, to control your world. The answer to that is this: don't fear it. Don't fear it. It will never come to pass. And the reason is this: the mind isn't such a power. And the mind can't be used for such a power once it is recognized that that which we call God is the only power. It becomes impossible to be controlled by anyone or any circumstance when it becomes known that that which we call God is the only power. Let us understand for a moment what we mean when we use that word God. Try for a minute to think of God. God who is neither a Jew nor a Christian. God who is neither Muslim nor Hindu. Think of a God that has no denominational connotation. Try to think of a God absolutely independent, above and beyond any form of religious belief. Take another step. Try to understand a God that is above and beyond every form of worship. A God that cannot be reached by a human being regardless of what manner, what way, what form one may try to reach that God, to influence, to sway, to move. Try, right here and now, to think of a God that governs you. Try to think of a God that thinks as much of the white as of the black, the brown, the yellow. Try to think of a God that has no awareness of your name or color or identity. A God that is a complete state of free being, that man cannot touch or reach, man cannot influence or sway. Think, try to vision a God that at this very moment is the reason that the sun, moon, and stars are moving in their orbits. A God who is the only reason that apples are always going to come from apple trees, and pineapple from pineapple trees, and papaya from papaya trees. Think of the God that you cannot influence to put apples on an orange tree, that you cannot influence to move the stars out of their courses or the tides. Think of a God entirely beyond your reach, and then reverse the position in which we have heretofore thought of God. Now see God as the governing influence of this whole universe, the only law unto this universe, the creative principle, the maintaining principle, the sustaining principle, the life of all being, performing its function the same yesterday, today, and forever. Think of this God, whom even the multitudes can't sway. Even the millions of allies praying for victory, or the millions of the opposite of the allies praying for victory, think of not one word of that ever reaching God's ear. Think of a God not influenced by the billions of prayers to save my side, or your side, or his side, or her side, or their side, or my child, or your child. Then you will begin to perceive that no harm, no evil can come nigh thy dwelling place. For God has never empowered anyone or any power to injure or destroy his creation. Only by disregarding the true nature of God can you be made to fear temporal powers, whether in the forms of weapons or the malpractice of men's minds. Only by not understanding the nature of God as the law, the only law. Thou shalt have no other law but me. Only in this realization can you understand that at this second you are God-governed. You are no more outside of God's government than the stars, the sun, the moon, the tides, the fish that are swimming in the sea, or the birds that are flying in the air. Relax into that awareness. There is a creative and a maintaining and a sustaining principle of life, and it is holding this world in its grasp. And then you will be able to smile at the intrigues of men who believe that they have power to set aside the laws of God, destroy the life of God, the freedom and the harmony of God, or interfere with the operation of God. There is the thought. Can you conceive of anything that can interfere with the operation of God? And then when you wonder at the evils that you have witnessed on earth, you will know that it has been our ignorance of this truth that has brought these catastrophes upon us. We have not understood that God is not influenced by man, but rather that God governs man and all creation. God alone governs, and God does not share his government with man whose breath is in his nostril, for he isn't even to be accounted of. There can be no fear in the realization of this infinite, universal God. When you study Scripture and see how the Hebrews lived their lives in fear of God's punishment, when you turn to the New Testament and realize that the Master gave as one of his reasons for being on earth was to forgive sin and sinners, you will know that there is no reason under the sun for continuing to fear punishment for your sins of omission or commission. As a matter of fact, even if some of those sins should be continuing into our present experience, even if we have not reached the spiritual elevation in which all sin has departed from us, and who has, even then we ought to know that we are not under the law of punishment, but under the law of grace, under forgiveness, under God's grace, which not only wipes out the penalty for sin, but what wipes out the capacity for sin. Sometimes the sin lingers on even after the penalty has been wiped out. But it isn't any different than the chicken that runs around after its head is cut off. It's just fooling us for a little while. It's dead, but it doesn't know it. And so too, our past is dead, even if some of the sins are temporarily being continued in the present. Why is our past dead? Because of our acknowledgement that there are not two powers operating. There is only one. You will find then that these ancient beliefs, some of them are religious beliefs, and some are medical beliefs. I recall from my very younger days when we were told of two major reasons why insane asylums are filled. And under medical law, neither one of those reasons are given today or believed. Materia Medica has dropped both of those beliefs as being causative of insanity. And therefore we know that these people who were confined were not confined for the condition claimed for them, but for the very mental malpractice the very ignorance of the materia medica beliefs of those days. So it is with us today. We are suffering from these mental suggestions which are eternally thrown at us as if they were authority, as if they were law. They aren't if you will accept God as the only power. They aren't if you can accept God as the only law. There isn't a single law of matter or of mind that can stand up as law in the experience of the individual who can begin to understand the universal nature of God governing its own universe and not permitting any interference with God's government. Think of trying to interfere with God's government of this universe, and you know it cannot be done. And therefore, when we suffer, we are suffering only from these mental images that have been thrown at us, which we have in our ignorance accepted. Now there are thousands of theological laws and medical laws and food laws and many other types of laws, legal laws, that aren't any more law than a scrap of paper. But they will remain as law in our experience until we come to the realization that there can be no such thing as a law contradicting or contrary to the law of God. There cannot be a law that isn't good. There cannot be a law of any name or nature that isn't a blessing. And every law that claims to be such must be understood as theory, belief, mental imposition, which in our ignorance we have accepted. You have read, I'm sure, of how circus elephants are trained. Iron bracelets placed on their feet, attached to a chain 10, 12 feet in length. And they're left that way for several months until the elephant knows that he can only go 10 or 12 feet and then he must stop. By the time he knows that, they take these chains away from him and these iron bracelets, and the elephant goes 10 or 12 feet and stops. He's been mentally conditioned so that he accepts that limitation even though it isn't there anymore. We too, we have accepted laws, some of the mental, some of the material, as detrimental, but only because we have not acknowledged that the God that creates or maintains and sustains or manifests itself as this universe must be an eternal and an infinite law of good, and that there can be no other law. There can be no law of limitation, no law of destruction, no law of sin, no law of disease, no law of death. There can be no such law. There can't even be the law of age. Over and over, I write to students, please stop accepting that Judaic law of 70 years and 10. God never made it. Man made that law, and we are being malpracticed into accepting it. It cannot be a law, because God cannot at the same time give life and destroy it. God cannot provide for life and for life's destruction. That cannot be. Yes, I know. In the insurance policies, the little print tells us about the acts of God that are destructive. But man made insurance policies, not God. The law of God doesn't contain any clauses about provision for the destruction of God's handiwork. The heavens declare the glory of God. The earth showeth forth his handiwork, and ye are the sons of God. Where do you find any provision in that for a law of age, infirmity, a law of disease, a law of death? In our metaphysical and spiritual approaches to life, we call this knowing of the truth treatment. It is sometimes used as a synonym for prayer, and it may be a form of prayer, not too high a form, but nevertheless a form. But one thing is certain: if we are to escape from the limitations of ordinary human existence, if we are to escape from the laws of matter and the laws of mind, we are only going to do it through learning some form of treatment such as this, whereby we remind ourselves each day that God is the only lawgiver and God is spirit. And the only laws are spiritual laws, and these govern my being, your being. These govern all being. These govern friend and foe. These govern all mankind. What of material laws and mental laws? These cannot be laws if God is law. And God is spirit, and law is spiritual. Then that which we have termed law is recognized as not law, but an imposition. A universal malpractice that's been handed on to us, which we have accepted and demonstrated, and which we now must consciously reject. We have to recognize frequently that we are not under the law of punishment, but under the law of forgiveness. We have to remember every single day that we are not under law, we are under grace. We were under the law when we were under Moses. We came under grace when we came under Christ Jesus. But this grace cannot act except through our acceptance of it, our recognition of it and acceptance of it. The ways of God are exactly the ways of all of God's work. There could be no automobiles and there could be no airplanes until the laws governing these were first recognized, discovered, applied. So with the law of God. The law of God fills all space. It is here and now, and it is available to us, but only in proportion as we first recognize it, accept it, consciously bring it into our experience, practice it, really, practice it with every contrary appearance that comes into our lives, consciously realize, I'm not under the law, I'm under grace. Or, this cannot be law, since only God is law. And then always rest in the Word. Settle back in the realization of what you can feel God to be. Now, you can't really know God with the mind. That would be bringing the infinite down into finiteness. But you can at least realize that God does not respond to the will of man, but that man responds to the will of God. You can, instead of trying to use God or make God your servant, you can submit yourself to God to be God's child, God's instrument, that through which God's glory is made manifest on earth. And then let God's glory flow through you. It never will be your glory, regardless of how beautiful you are or become, or how worthy or worthwhile. It never will redound to your credit, for it will always be God's glory, God's freedom, God's health, God's understanding. Scripture tells us His understanding is infinite. Therefore, nobody can ever boast of His wisdom. No one can ever boast of His knowledge. No one can ever boast of His power, for all power is of God, and we are the instruments through which and as which God's glory appears on earth. But we have to submit ourselves to it, not try to use it in our behalf. And above all, don't try to use it against the power of evil, for evil has no power. And the very idea of trying to set God against the devil will defeat your purpose. For in the eyes of God, in the consciousness of God, there is no evil, there is no devil, there is no Satan. These are man-made images. It's the most glorious thing in all of this world to be able to realize that no one on the face of this globe has the power to do evil to anyone. No one on the face of this globe has the power to be evil. God is the only power, and God's power is a universal, spiritual power of eternal and immortal life. No one can thwart the will of God. There is no way to thwart the will of God, for there is no will but the will of God. When man tries to set up his puny will and power against good, he might just as well be sending his armies against the Hebrew prophet who had the wisdom to say, they have only the arm of flesh. Nothingness, no power. Stand ye still, ye need not fight. Regardless of the appearance of evil in your life or the life of those in your family, among your friends, or if you're active in this work, your patients or your students. It lies within your power to realize that God has never given His power to anyone, to any group, to any condition, that therefore there is no power on earth but God's. The vision of this only comes to you as you can forget whatever you may have learned in your younger days about God, whatever you may have learned in sectarian beliefs about God, and lift your vision to the God that existed before there was a man to form a religion or a religious teaching. Try to visualize just that truth, that God existed before ever a religious teaching or doctrine or theory had been formulated. And the nature of God then is the same as the nature of God now. God is the same God today, yesterday, and forever. And God is God in every quarter of this globe and of all of the other globes that exist. And there is no power, and there never will be a power, to thwart the will of God, the law of God, the life of God, the way of God, unless we continue to accept these impositions, these mental impositions of limitation, and accept a power apart from God. Some of you might wonder whether these things have been proven. Heavens, yes, they have been proven in one way and one degree or another for the past 75 years. They've been proven in the demonstration of harmony in individual lives, physically, mentally, morally, and financially. They have been demonstrated in business activity, in agricultural activity, in every form of economic and government activity. They haven't yet been tried on a wide enough scale to be national or internationally accepted. But they have been tried and proven in the experience of individuals and individual groups. Oh yes. To prove this in even a tiny measure is to prove it in the greatest degree. To be able to heal a simple cold with the understanding of one power is to prove the entire principle. The rest only has to be worked out through experience and continuous practice. We have warred one power against another. We have utilized, or tried to, the power of God against the power of the devil, The world hasn't won out with it. The world hasn't been able to prove that God is greater than evil, because there's more evil on earth than good. But the reason is that success cannot come by trying to use one power against another power, but by giving up power and accepting God as one power. By submitting oneself to one power, by never attempting to destroy evil power, just to recognize its nature. Every form of error that would touch you must touch you through the mind. If you can't accept it in your mind, it can't have any effect on your body or your pocketbook. The only approach there is to you is through your mind. The body itself has no intelligence. Therefore, it cannot do anything or be anything of itself, except what you can accept through your mind. Therefore, you are the determining factor in your life's experience, because you can reject that which you do not wish to demonstrate. And it is only difficult in the first few weeks or months of practice if one practices faithfully. In other words, every time a suggestion of any kind tries to come to thought of an erroneous condition, circumstance, influence, it is only necessary to remind oneself, but there is only one power, there is only one law, there is only one life, there is only one substance, there is only one cause, and rest in that word. It is only necessary to remember that if it is of an evil connotation, it cannot be of God, therefore it cannot be endowed with power. For thou shalt have no other powers but me. Yes, but if you are not alert to reject these subliminal perceptions or malpractices, then you are accepting in your mind that which will ultimately appear on your body or in your pocketbook or your human relationships. We were given dominion. Right from the start we were given dominion. But wherein lies our dominion? In our ability to accept or reject. Are there two powers, good and evil? Then God is not infinite. God is not omnipotent. God is not omnipresent. And it's just foolishness to go around believing that you believe in God. You can't actually understand God and accept the reality of two powers. Therefore, your dominion consists of the ability, whenever an erroneous thought, condition, appearance comes to you, to reject it. There can be but one law, and that's spiritual. There can be but one power, and that's spiritual. It isn't a question of dynamite over atomic force. It isn't a matter of missiles over bombers. It's a matter of there is no power but God. All power must be spiritual, since God is spirit. And if power is spiritual, we need not fear the power of matter or of mind. It is true that if you do not abide in this word, and let this word abide in you, that you will be as a branch of a tree that is cut off and withereth. It is true that if you do not abide in this realization of one power, if you do not reject consciously all of these mental impositions that are flung at you, you can then be made to suffer as the world is suffering. But if you do abide in this word of truth, and let this word abide in you, if you do live in the secret place of the Most High, where there is only one presence, one power, one cause, one law, one being, none of these evils that destroy 1,000 at your left and 10,000 at your right will come nigh thy dwelling place.